Welcome to episode 169 of Stageworthy. I'm your host, Phil Rickaby. Stageworthy is a podcast about people in Canadian theatre featuring conversations with actors, directors, playwrights, and more. Episode 169, you guys. That means that next week is episode 170. I'm going to be hitting episode 200, if you can believe it, sometime this summer. I mean, I could look ahead. I've got it all mapped out, but I could look ahead. But you know what? For now, let's say it's coming. Episode 200, sometime this summer, which is really exciting. Now, we've been doing this podcast for 3 years, and usually the episode 200 is the marker. But you know what? Because of a few extra episodes now and then, because of Fringe Festivals and things like that, episode 200 comes after the 3-year anniversary, but it's still pretty awesome. I thought it was pretty impressive when I hit 100 episodes, and 200 is even more awesome. I have a few things that I'm working on that I really want to do. Last year, I convened the Indie Theater Producers Roundtable, and that's something that I want to do again. I'm thinking about trying to find a way to get a whole bunch of playwrights together too and have them have a conversation, which is something really awesome. But right now, what is on my mind and something that I'm working on is something that I'm calling the Introverted Actor's Guide to Networking. Maybe we'll add schmooze fest parties, that sort of thing on there somehow, but generally, the idea is networking, and that's something that is going to be a little bit of a different episode, but I want to try to find some solutions for those of us who are introverted actors, who maybe avoid those networking events, who maybe go to opening night and deke out as quickly as possible so that we don't have to deal with that. Maybe there are things that we're missing out that we would benefit from being able to be there and to, be able to stand in the room and converse with people, which, we don't like to do. So I'm trying to put together some ideas, and it'll be a little bit of a different episode, but it is something that I'm working on. And so what I would like to do is ask you, if you're an introverted actor and there's something you want to know, please drop me a line. As usual, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at StageworthyPod. The website is stageworthypodcast.com. And, if you want to drop me a line directly, I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and my website is philrickaby.com. And I would really love to hear from you about the things that you would love to know more about in terms of working against your introversion and still being able to participate in those networking events that I think are super important to a theater career. My guest this week is Daniela Vlaskalic, one of the playwrights of Mules, presented by Theatrefront and Hit and Myth at the Streetcar Crow's Nest from February 15th until March 2nd in Toronto. So why don't we talk about Mules?
Of course, yes.
What can you tell me about Mules? Like the play.
I was going to say.
To be specific, let's talk about Mules, the play.
Okay. Well, I co-wrote the play with my co-writer Beth Graham, and we've written a number of things together. And I think the impetus behind wanting to write a play like Mules was we were seeing a lot of plays, when we did an early draft of this many years ago, that had all of these great roles for men, like High Life, Mojo, a lot of Martin McDonough, Connor McPherson, I've seen The Seafarer, Quentin Tarantino, can we say his name anymore? A lot of his films, we were seeing all of these, and we just thought, these are great plays, great movies.
Yeah.
Why are there no women's parts? Why are none of these characters women?
It's an excellent question.
And I don't know if people don't like to see women like that, or we couldn't quite figure out what it was, and we just thought, we'd see something like Mojo or something like High Life and be like, I wish I could be in that, or see a woman do that, because you see these characters who are not necessarily good, or make poor choices or just have challenging lives. You know, they're desperate or whatever it is, and they make for great stories, great theater, and great plays and great characters. And so we thought, well, why don't we write something like that? Why don't we? That was the impetus. And of course, the play really branched out into, you know, as we examined situations where women would be desperate, but would also, and I don't want to digress, but what those plays or films have, Coen Brothers, another one, is there's also humor.
Yes. Yeah.
So they're also very funny. Mm-hmm. So we thought, you know, and I think putting those things together is really what we wanted to do, is make a play with strong female characters, desperate situations, and examining all the things that women talk about, you know, and not just women, men too, but, you know, friendship, motherhood, being, you know, I guess marginalized, or being sexualized, or, you know, all these different things that women sometimes deal with, or oftentimes deal with. And create a situation where they try and take back some power, and what happens.
I mean, for anybody who's not quite getting it from this, that we're not talking about like the animal mules. We're talking about like
drug runners,
drug mules.
Yes, drug mules.
And it's funny because as you were talking about, you know, the fact that these movies that sort of were the inspiration, and these plays, they're about people behaving badly, but also humor. I think in our popular culture, when we put women in those situations, we don't make them funny. It's like, oh, there's a woman in this, it's got to be very serious about how this person got there, and we can't inject humor into it.
That's right.
Which is the separation, I think, between when we tend to tell stories about women doing that and when men do that.
That's right.
I think it's taking something back to put the humor in it.
I think so. I think so. I hope so. I mean, we always try and put humor, I think, in anything that we write, and it's just rife. You know, a play about drug runners is rife for comedy. You wouldn't think so, especially Mules. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen, body functions, all of that stuff. And, you know, why wouldn't we examine that and just go all the way and see what happens? You know, put these two women in a bathroom, in an airport bathroom, and let them go and let them see what happens. And that's essentially what we did. Was we, you know,
is there a difficulty when you put someone in an airport bathroom? Mm-hmm. Is there a difficulty in how you keep them in that place? Because people usually only spend a certain amount of time in a washroom, and you've got to fill like an hour and a half. So do you have to manipulate ways that they can't leave? One
of the characters has a plan. So there is definitely a plan. So there's an intention to stay in the bathroom. And I think it's a lot more about convincing the other one to stay in the bathroom. So, you know, as in all sort of capers or plots or heists or whatever you want to call them, they're not always necessarily the best plans. They're not always well thought out plans, but people make plans and make crazy choices. And, you know, bank robbers have a history of drug runners. They put themselves in crazy situations, and sometimes because they're desperate or whatever the situation is. And sometimes they get away with it and sometimes they don't, but it's a risk that you take.
Aren't half-assed capers like the most fun to see? Like, how is this going to fall apart, and then how are they going to pull it back together?
Yes, or will they pull it back together?
Exactly.
You know, I think there's all of that that's also involved. And so I think, you know, there's so many elements and inspiration that we drew from for this play. And then, of course, as when you write anything, it takes on a life of its own. And so, you know, we really, I think, just let it go. You know, once we allowed ourselves to not put any parameters and allowed ourselves to let it be funny. And as often in desperate situations, things are funny, and allow there to be that humor, it really just kind of took off.
Was there, you said allow yourself to be funny. Was that a difficult thing to come to? Did you find it hard to let it be funny, or?
No, I think we intended it to be funny. Yeah. I mean, we'll see. Hopefully it's funny. But as you say, it's feels like we were breaking the norm, because
Sure.
if you're going to write a play about women who are drug runners, or you're going to write a play about women who are exotic dancers or whatever they are, or single moms, that it's going to be, it's got to have this element of seriousness to it. Yeah. And it's like, once we decided that it didn't have to have that, then it just felt freeing, really, more than anything else.
Yeah. Huh. Excuse me.
Okay.
How long did it take to write this play?
Well, it's kind of a long story. We wrote like a version of it, a brief version of it, many, many years ago, probably like 13 years ago. It was just experimental. We were playing around. We did a kind of a workshop production of it, and then we shelved it for many, many years. And then we came back to it a few years ago. We thought, we should look at that play again. We should pull it off the shelf, pull it out of the drawer. All those things that you do. And, brush it off and look at it again. And, of course, so much of the world had changed in that time. Facebook. Became a major thing. Cell phones. People, became much more prevalent. And, and because the play also has an element of friendship about it, the nature of friendship has changed. I think because of social media, because of because of Facebook, because of a lot of those things have changed. So we found that the play maybe fit more now and was more relevant now than it was back then. I don't know. I think back then when we were first writing it, our ideas weren't fully formed. We had an idea about it, and we tried to kind of put it out on paper, and then kind of worked. It kind of didn't, And so then I think we needed to just sit with it for a while.
Well, sure. I mean, an idea. There's one thing to have an idea at the beginning, but if you let it sit for a while, it can really sort of grow and get a little deeper.
Yeah, and I think and I think that's been with a lot of the writing that we've done. It feels like we've done a lot of sort of early versions, and then we've sort of let it sit for a long time, and then we've come back to it with fresh eyes.
When you came back to it, how long did it take for you to take what you had and turn it into what you have now?
Probably, not writing constantly, but probably a couple of years.
Okay.
With intense blocks of writing over that time. So, and because we write, Beth lives in Edmonton and I live in Toronto, so a lot of our writing is done over Skype, sharing a document. That's kind of how we do it.
Oh, okay. So you write together. Not I write part and then you write part?
We write together,
How does that
side
work?
by side.
Like, aside from just over Skype with a document, like, how do you, what does that process look like in terms of, how you deal with writing with someone?
I don't know. I think you start to get into each other's. That's done. Should I wait till that's done?
No, we'll just talk over it.
Okay. I find that sometimes you start to we have this joke where we start to share one brain, because once you're in the zone, I mean, the most challenging part is getting that first draft out, or the first sort of shape of it. And then once you have that and you're both, and that's just a lot of back and forth, a lot of what should happen now, just a lot of talking it out. And once we kind of get that shape laid out, then we both are on the same page, literally and figuratively. And so you start to know where it needs to go, and we talk a lot about the characters and what their journeys are. And so we literally just go back and forth. And you have to be very open.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you have to sort of say, even if, she makes a suggestion, or I know times I make a suggestion, and you're just thinking, well, that is not a good suggestion. You just go, okay, let's just put it in. And then after you come back, you're like, oh, actually, that works really well. Because sometimes your first impulse is to say no. It often is.
Yeah.
But when you're co-writing with someone, you have to sort of train yourself. And I think it's a challenge. It's a great relationship if you find someone that you can do that with. But I know with a lot of people who want to co-write, the biggest challenge they have is finding that person that they can write with. I think it's that finding that person, I think, is the most challenging part, where you just get on the same brainwave.
I mean, even just the ability to say yes to an idea that isn't yours can be a difficult thing.
Yes.
The tendency is my idea is obviously the better one, and when somebody else suggests something that isn't quite in line with like what you're thinking, it's very difficult to say yes to that.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's very freeing.
It is, and it's about trust.
Yeah.
Ultimately, you have to really trust your writing partner, and obviously, I trust Beth, and I guess she trusts me. So, you just trust that you're both going to that it's the two of you, but the greater thing is the play.
Yeah.
And that you're both serving the play ultimately. So I think it's a process. It's definitely a process.
Also, saying yes to something now doesn't mean that it can't. Like, if it doesn't work, you'll both realize it later.
Absolutely.
You know,
that's happened many times.
Yeah, if you give it to a group of actors to read as a out loud, you will very quickly realize what works and what doesn't.
Oh yeah, and you'll definitely go and you'll be surprised. You'll think, "Oh, I never thought that would work," and you're like, "That's one of my favorite moments of the play now." So there's because it is very surprising when it makes that transition, and then people bring interpretations, or you see things you thought, "Oh, I never read it that way," and they're doing something that's elevating, just taking it to another level.
That's what, I mean. I always find when I'm writing, one of the most important things is to give it to to a group of actors and say, "Please sit down and read this. I need to hear it." And you learn so much hearing other people read what you put down. That it's, for me, it's like one of the most important stages in a writing process.
And Beth and I are both actors, and so typically we've always written for ourselves.
Yes.
And so, of course, when you write something, you know what you have in mind and how you're going to do it. And even if the writing doesn't work, you make it work because you're both performing it together. And so this, of course, is a different process. But I think because we're actors writing, we just have a really clear sense of, and both have worked a lot on new Canadian plays. So I've certainly been in that process on both sides, as an actor and as a writer, and as both. And so you figure out pretty quickly that workshop process, that trying stuff out process. I mean, there's even sections of the play where we'll be like, let's just try it. Like, let's go look at it. We'll know pretty quickly in the room. And then you also have to have that challenge of going, okay, is it the writing or are they just not quite there yet? So you also have to find times when you just have to let them trust the writing. It's a lot of trust. That has to happen.
That is one of the things, is because sometimes you can hear something and not trust that the actor will get there.
Yeah.
But I mean, if the playwright wasn't in the room, the actor would have to find a way to get there.
Yeah.
Right?
And we did leave. I think we were there for the first few days, just to answer any questions. And we did do some rewrites, definitely. Yeah. And then, you just get to that point where you're like, yeah, it's time for us to just go.
Yeah.
And let them struggle through it and figure it out.
Was that a difficult thing to do, though? Like, to know that this is, it's your baby.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you have to be able to let go of it, but it's not easy to send your child off to school.
No, I don't have children. So I guess this is the closest thing to it. But it is challenging. It is challenging. But you can't, it's also part of the reason that neither of us have really taken on the concept of directing our own work. Because I think when it works the best is when you can hand it over. Yeah. It's hard. It's it's definitely, and I think being absent is probably the best way to do it. Yes, because it's very hard to sit in the room going, well, just do it faster, or say it like this, or if you just go over there, it'll work, or, but then they don't own it. No. And so it's not helpful ultimately at the end of the day.
It's almost disruptive for you to be in the room, and even if you don't say the things, there's a you're having an impulse, and that's distracting for everyone.
Yes. And they need the time to discover. They have to own it ultimately. And the best way is if they make all the discoveries for themselves. And hopefully ideally they'd make discoveries that you hadn't even thought of, and they just take it to another level. I think that's the best. When that happens, you're in really good hands.
Yeah. How did the play come to Theatrefront?
Well, I've known Vicki Anderson for quite a while. I worked on a play called The Orange Dot a couple seasons ago that she directed. Starring was myself and Sean Doyle. And I'd known her before that as well. And, she's familiar with a lot of my writing and our writing. And we were trying to find someone that might want to look at the play again.
Right.
And I had been talking to her about the play, just casually, in a casual manner, and she just said, well, can I read it? I'd like to read it. So I said, sure. And so sent it off to her and didn't hear anything. So I thought, well, as that happens. And I know she talked to Dylan Trowbridge, who's the associate, and, because... I think she was like, well, we're friends, so I don't know if I really like this or if I'm biased because we're afraid. There's all that happens. Course, And Dylan felt very passionate about the play as well. And so they did a salon. Theatrefront does these salons where they do a reading of the play and to kind of gauge a reaction. So we did a salon in April, and it was a stage reading in a little coffee shop, and it went over really well. And she got in touch and said we want to produce it.
Nice.
So she contacted Hit and Myth, which is another kind of a independent producer, and asked if they would like to come on board to co-produce. And they really liked the play as well, and they agreed.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice. So that's kind of how it happened.
Awesome. So one of the things I always like to talk about is people's theater origin stories. Like, how did you find this calling?
Okay.
What was it that brought you to the theater life?
Well,
do you remember when you first encountered theater as a child, or how you came to this at all?
Well, it's kind of I don't know if it's an odd story. I'm sure it's similar for a lot of people. But my parents were immigrants. I'm first generation Canadian. And there, as far as I know, there is no history of anybody in my family that were really interested in the arts. They grew up in a communist country. And apparently my uncle, I think, had some ideas or fantasies about being an actor. But of course, it's very, would have been very different at the time. And, but for some reason, and I don't know where this idea came from, I knew at like 5 or 6 years old that I wanted to be an actor. That I wanted to be in the arts.
Have you seen something?
And my parents never took me to the theater. It was not part of our life growing up. I grew up in Thunder Bay. And so they cannot... They were completely mystified, and I think they still might be, as to where I got this idea. And the only thing I can think of is that it must have been at school. It must have been in kindergarten or something like that. We must have had a day where we did plays or read plays, or I think every one of my family members has a different version of when I announced that I was going to be an actor. But it was just something that I knew, and it's a complete mystery. Yeah. Still, I mean, I haven't had that moment. I was like, that was the day. But it came from an unknown place.
There are people that I've spoken to people who can remember the moment, and I've known people who are just like, I don't know, I just knew.
Yeah.
Because I think for some of us, it might have been a moment I think for me, I remember there was one year in kindergarten where this troupe of actors came through and they put on a show, and then they did a workshop with people after, and I think that might have been it for me.
It might have been.
No.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is it might have been something like that. But as I said, I was, when I started school, I was born in Canada, but my parents didn't speak English, so I was very ESL when I started school. And so it must have been something like that. That's all I can think of, that it must have been something that I saw. maybe something at school or an older class did something, and I just was hooked.
And it's one thing to go from being a child of 4 or 5 and saying that you want to be an actor to graduating from school and deciding that that's what you wanted to do. Because a lot of people start out quite young saying they want to be in theater, and somehow the education system or the world or whatever just makes them decide that's not for them.
Yes.
So for you, how did you hold on to it? At what point was it when you were older, know that it was going to be your career?
I don't know if I ever knew for sure. I wanted it to be my career, but I was very subversive about it. I knew that my family was not on board, and so it was not something that I talked about with them because it would just cause strife. So I didn't talk about it. But I took all the drama classes at school, all the things that you do, in high school, and then once I graduated from high school, I started auditioning, or before I graduated, for theater schools, and I went to a 2-year college, Douglas College in New Westminster, had a 2-year acting program, and I didn't tell anyone. I just prepared, and I went and I did my audition, and I got in. And so I just announced to my parents that I was going to Douglas College for theater.
How did they take that?
I think they just thought I would get over it. It would go away. I mean, they didn't really take it too seriously. They took it a lot more seriously when, after 2 years, then which was a great introductory program, I would say. But what I knew after that 2-year program was that I was very serious about it. Because, I started when I was 17 or 18, in college, you go to college. And so, that, I think that, doing that 2-year program made me realize that that's when I said, no, I'm definitely doing this. And then I auditioned again for more serious theater schools. And I went to the U of A.
Okay.
I did the Bachelor of Fine Arts there, which was a very tough school to get into at the time. I don't know if it still is. It was a conservatory program. And that was when they were really getting nervous.
Oh, yeah?
But they were it was difficult, not difficult, but I think because I was the first person in my father's family to go to university, they were happy I was going to university. I think that was a big deal.
Right.
So they sort of relented, and then they, but I think they still believe that perhaps one day I'll phone and say, okay.
Do you think they might still be holding on to that? That one day you'll be like, listen, I'm giving up this theater thing. I'm going to do a respectable
I've only
job.
been a professional actor for 20 years now, but writer. But today's the day. I think, I hung on to it. But as I said, I was really subversive about it. I wasn't like, having huge arguments and fights about it. I just thought, I'm just going to quietly do this, and if I get in, then I'll go,
It's actually a really smart way to do it with parents who might be resistant to going to theater. Kids, if you're listening,
I would recommend it.
We recommend, don't tell anybody until you get into the school.
Yeah, I don't know. I meet so many people now who are even my age or younger, and their parents are so supportive and so excited about them going to the arts. And maybe it's just the people that I meet or aren't resistant.
There's 2 kinds of parents.
Yeah.
There's parents who are super supportive and encourage their children to go into the arts, and there are parents who do not.
Yeah. There's no in between.
There isn't any in between. I think.
I think you might be right.
I think that the parents tend to do one or the other, and how the kids react to that sort of depends on where they end up.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right.
When did you start writing for theater?
I started writing. So I went to U of A, and how I met Beth Graham was she was in my class at theater school. So we spent 3 years together. And at the end of that, and because U of A at the time was very much a conservatory program, so a lot of focus on classics, a lot of focus on obviously Shakespeare and Shaw and ballet and all those things that you do at a conservatory program. And there was very little focus on new work. But everything that we were seeing in our community was all new Canadian work. And so it was this really interesting time because we were felt like we were being trained for one thing, but when we looked out into what was happening, especially with something like the Edmonton Fringe, which is like the largest fringe in North America, and so much new work constantly. Catalyst Theater, which is now a big, huge, making every theater company was doing new work. And that's what we were seeing. So we kind of felt unprepared, or sort of a little bit like, well, how are we going to do this? We weren't having classes on how do you workshop a new play, and how do you write a new play, or how do you create a new play?
I think that's a very new question.
Yes.
I don't think that school was unique at that time.
Okay.
I think most schools have only just started to talk about how you create a new play, how you rehearse, like how do you work with a new play. Most conservatory programs have always been like, we're going to do your Shakespeare, we're going to do your Shaw, and then when you get out into the world, you're ready for everything. And there hasn't been the question of like, how do you develop a new play, and how do you produce a new play, and how do you do all this stuff? It's only relatively recently that question is being answered. Yes. So,
I'll take your word for it. So what happened was we had a brand new on our final year, we had a brand new professor, Charlie Tomlinson, who started teaching at the U of A, and he had a huge history, and I think that was their attempt to bring in somebody who had a lot of history in working on new play development and creating new work. He'd worked a lot with Codco, Andy Jones, just a lot of new play development. He'd been in Toronto for a while, and so we were fascinated. We didn't have him as he directed us in a play, but we didn't have him as a professor. But we'd go and watch the things he was doing with the first and second years. We thought, wow, like he was encouraging to create new work. It was a new play creation course. So we met with him, and we said, we want to write a play, right? This kind of, right out of theater school. And he was like, okay, great. He's like, well, if you want to write a play, I'll direct it. So we were like, okay, let's get a fringe spot, all the things. And at that time it seemed, I guess it still is if you want to do a fringe show and things like that. Just the opportunities are still there. Yeah. And so we thought, we just embarked on this crazy journey. And then he ended up coming on as a co-writer, and which was really exciting. And we went through this whole process, and just, as you do with anything like that, you beg, borrow, and steal props and things, and ask your friends to do lights and all this stuff. And we ended up creating this version of what is now the Drowning Girls. And so we did a version of that, and that became very popular. And again, with that play, we performed it, and then several years later we rewrote it, and now that play has a very long life and continues to be produced on its own without us after we toured it.
I think it's great that you are willing to revisit things, because I think some people get it into their heads that once it's performed, it's done. There's that's the end of it. Whereas you learn so much from a performance that you can take all of that and make the play better.
Well, our attitude was always that these were obviously fringe, whatever medium you can find that they were we always called them workshop productions, because they really were. You learned so much. They weren't the finished product. Ideally, that and everything you learned would then get to move into a bigger theater that had a proper set designer and costume designer. You'd have more time with the writing. And I feel like maybe the Fringe used to be that. At that time, or it felt like it used to be that. Certainly the one in Edmonton did.
I think a lot of them did used to feel like that.
That they were
more looking for the final product.
Yes.
There's a lot more expectation on Fringe shows now to be done. There's very few Fringes that I've been to where they still are like, it can be rough.
Yeah.
And most of them are not.
Yeah. And so, which I think is too bad, because it's such a great way to experiment. It's such a great way for new work, I think, to go, okay, this is like a 75-minute version, 55-minute version. We're going to throw everything at this. We're going to throw a bathtub in. We're going to piecemeal things together. We're going to experiment. It's still a show. Like, I'm not saying they're watching a rehearsal. There's still all the elements. There's costumes and it's a piece, but then you're able to go after 5 whatever you get. 4, sometimes 5, sometimes 6, if you're lucky, 7. performances, and you kind of go, okay, like, let's go back. What worked? What didn't work? I would change this. I would add a character. I would take 2 characters away. Whatever, But there just doesn't seem to be that next.
I think there have been too many Fringe successes.
Maybe that's
people
what it is.
have gone on to massive success, and so that's what people are looking for. Is like, now the Fringe is where we find these massive successes, rather than where we find like new rough gems.
Yeah, which I think is too bad. I mean, it's great in some ways, but then in some ways I think, okay, well, it's unfortunate because really it's so rough, right? Oftentimes you're throwing everything in there. You're doing it for nothing. Yeah. Like literally $0. Yeah. And then I guess if you're successful with that, then somebody picks it up and you get to then maybe make $5. But but there isn't that investment in going, that's a really good idea. Like
Yeah.
But then you also have to be willing, I think, as the creator or the writer, to take it apart and put it back together again. And I think some people are like, no, I'm done. I'm good. I wrote that. I'm finished. I'm moving on to my next thing.
But there's so much more that you could learn from it.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, the Canadian play already has such a short lifespan. Oh, it gets one, if you're lucky, it gets one production, a premiere. Yeah. Maybe it'll get 2, and then it disappears. And I just think that's terrible.
Well, I think it is, but I think that it's because a lot of theaters they just want their premiere.
Yeah, they want the world premiere.
They don't want the world premiere, and they want the world premiere, and then they're done.
Yeah.
Had you seen a Fringe festival before you found yourself in Edmonton?
I'd gone to ones in Vancouver before. Okay. Not to that extent. I mean, if you've been to the Edmonton,
I have. It's if you only know smaller fringes, like Toronto or Vancouver, or even smaller than that, then Winnipeg and Edmonton are. I don't even know what the word is. They are startling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And very exciting. And you really feel like you're a part of some... I mean, I've never been to the Edinburgh Fringe. No. So I understand it's similar to that in the sense of... I mean, Edinburgh is obviously much bigger. Yeah. But same kind of vibe. Same kind of... You're really a part of something enormous. Yeah. It's not just a thing that's happening on the Fringe. It's an actual... the main event.
Well, it's because in Winnipeg and Edmonton, like... They're the only places I've been where, you go to a restaurant. So it's like, what brings you to the city? And you say, I'm in a Fringe, and somebody's like, what's your show?
Yeah. So
whereas everywhere else say, I'm in the Fringe. You're like, what is that?
I know.
Yeah.
It's a very different vibe. Yeah. So I don't know. I certainly haven't done a Fringe, in many, many years. But I think, as I say, they're different now. And what we use them for, I don't think people, as you say, really are looking for that anymore. So, we've taken these early works that were workshops, really, and gone, well, let's go back. Let's go back. These were good ideas. These were good themes, good plays, good parts.
I wonder what is the venue for doing that now? If not Fringe, then I guess it's self-production. Sometimes I don't even know anymore.
I don't know because, I think at a Fringe festival you're willing to go and see 3 or 4 shows a day, right? Oh, yeah. You just dive in. It's not a huge, you're not getting a baby. It's a different kind of investment, right?
There's also the audience is ready to see things.
That's right.
At other times of year, you've almost got to beg them. Just come in. It's only an hour and a half.
Yeah.
It's just come, please.
Just come. So I think the whole tone is very different, and so I don't know if self-producing you would have that.
No.
I think it would be difficult because it's hard to get people to come out again, and they don't want to see something in progress. So I'm not sure. I don't know if we've skipped over that part, and I'm not sure if there's a way to bring it back.
If we have, I think it's too bad.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's a way to bring it back.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
I don't know. With Mules having been, it's seen a couple of lives between the salon staged reading and now. Have there been changes? Is it very different? Like there was the first version and there was a salon version and there was this version. Has it grown since the salon?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think absolutely. And I think the main theme is there. The main outline is there. I think We've developed one of the characters a lot more, and there's always changes. I mean, I went to see a run today, and Beth watched on Skype, and just on our way over here, we were talking about making a couple of adjustments here and there. Yeah. I know as long as I think the actors are willing to accept some adjustments then we'll continue to make them without screwing them up. and they're minor things.
You're making big ones, or you're just making like little lines?
Just little ones. Like we made some bigger ones. I think in that first week when we were doing table work and just examining big questions, and we did some more work at the beginning of January. We spent 3 days, solid days with the play, and after the salon, because things come up and questions come up, and we're able to take it apart and look at moments and look at characters through lines and the journey of the play. And so, I think certainly the play is in a good place, and we're just really excited. I mean, we've got an amazing team, an unbelievable team of people. So
when you're, you're making those big changes early on, How are you, what method do you use? And this is like just formulating this I'm saying. Because you mentioned about how sometimes you're trying to figure out, like, do I change this or do I let them figure it out? How do you know that this needs to be changed and it might not be something they can figure out? Or are you just taking a gamble?
I think sometimes it's obvious. Like sometimes you go, oh yeah, I never saw that. It's sort of like if you look at a picture for a long time and you've never noticed that in the corner there's a giant bird or something. You've heard the play or you've read it together so many times, and suddenly somebody asks you a question. You're like, wow, how did we miss that inconsistency? So sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes, obviously we have a clear idea of how the play should go or needs to go. We want it to go. Yeah. And so I don't think we're willing to change anything that's going to really... If people are suggesting things that's like, well, that's not this story. Right. What you're suggesting is maybe a different play. Right. Or a different story, or maybe a different character. So I think that's the best way to gauge it. If it feels like the idea or the suggestion is really in tune with the play and really what the play is saying or the characters are saying, then certainly we'll consider it. But if it feels like, okay, you just haven't you're not quite figuring out your journey yet, or you're not sure on the play, then we'll be a little more resistant. We're not saying no forever. If it keeps coming up, we might examine it again, but that's sort of the gauge I think that we use. It's a good gauge. Because sometimes people make suggestions because they want the play to be something that it's not. No, that's very true. And you're like, well, we didn't write that play. We wrote this play. That's always... Whenever I've been at a theater talkback, I'm always like, if they don't have an agenda, this just turns into like a bunch of people saying what they think it should have been. Yes. Whereas we should be ask the audience questions, things like that. But that's I totally get what you're saying. What have you learned about the play since they started rehearsing? Is there a lesson about it that was not apparent to you before this production started working? I think the biggest thing I've learned so far is that there's a lot of possibilities in the play. It's a lot of things a lot of discoveries that they've made that are really exciting that I didn't see. And I think that's what's really exciting about what's happening right now, is that you get locked into an idea or a way, which is also why it was good for us to leave the room when we did. And I think what they're doing and it's still very much the play we wrote, but they're just finding all of these really exciting new things and directions and humor that we didn't even know was in there. So it's surprising me. I have two more questions about the play for you. And this is sort of, you can answer one or both of those. Okay. What are you most looking forward to about this play? And what scares you the most about this play in its production? I think what I'm looking forward to the most is actually to see it with an audience. And that's also scares me the most. Because I think we're not, I am of the belief, and I think most people are, that the audience is the final piece.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just so fascinated just to see how it's going to go. Where, will all those questions, will they laugh? Will they cry? Will they get on the ride? And how will they react? And all of that. And it's also the most terrifying part of adding the audience. Yeah. Because you live with it so long in this bubble, you know, and I think, I'm always a huge fan of we're not doing a preview. I think we're doing an invited dresser, but that first time, whatever that is, whether it's preview or opening night or wherever you first get that first significant audience. I don't mean like 2 or 3 people. Mm-hmm. And you suddenly hear everything you hear every line for the first time. You feel every moment for the first time, and you see them or you're feeling it. And so that's, I think, for me, my favorite part of the process.
Well, 2 or 3 people is not like an audience. That's a couple of people watching. Yeah. Like a large audience. For me, anytime I've created a new show, there's the show will start and there's like this anxiety until that first laugh. Like, if I don't hear, like, this is where we think the first laugh is. Yeah. And if this doesn't happen, we're way off what we think. And you're just sort of like waiting for that first reaction. And once you got it, you're like, okay, we're going to be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely what I'm the most excited about and what I'm the most nervous about. And for friends too. I have so many friends asking about the play and how's it going. And you're like, it's going great, but come see it. You just kind of go, and then you'll know, Yeah. It's that experience.
So you mentioned Beth sort of like Skyping into rehearsals and things like that. Is this how your relationship mostly sort of sits right now? Is through a screen, or like both through watching rehearsals and you're working together? I think a lot of our, she was here for the first week of rehearsal in Toronto, so she was in the room, and she's coming back, so she'll be back next week. And we try and find pockets of time to write together. So at the beginning of January, we had 4 or 5 days together. I was in Calgary; she came down. So we try and find writers retreats or just time to visit because we're also friends. But a lot of it is done over the screen. A lot of because it's it's easier that way. You can find 2 or 3 hours in a day, even with the time change. And you just block it out, and you get into the zone. And now that we've worked together for so many years, we can get into the rhythm really quickly, of the writing rhythm, I guess. It's good. Does working with a partner help with writer's block?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it does. It really helps. Don't get me wrong. There will be days where, we're supposed to be having a 3-hour writing session and we spend about 2 hours just gossiping and goofing off. And I'm like, that's sort of the version of writer's block. Okay. Is you just end up procrastinating and having a visit instead. But it's far less. But I would say the first draft of anything is always incredibly challenging with a writing partner, or just that first birthing of just to get it out on the page. And then after that is what I call the fun part, is because then you just go back and you're revising and new ideas are coming. But
nice. It's been great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great to talk to you.
This has been a Homebody Productions production.